It's time for Recipe of the Day. Prime rib is a pricey cut of beef, so if you are cooking one, you want it to be perfect, and this one is. It's dry brined, so it's seasoned right through and extra tender, and then it is slow roasted at a low temperature for a long time, rested, and then reverse seared for a crispy, wonderful dark crust. And there's an au jus that simmers along under it while it's cooking. Beautiful. Here's what you need to know. First, the word prime in prime rib is actually supposed to refer to the quality, like USDA prime, but a lot of vendors call it prime rib no matter what the grade of the meat is. So be aware of that. If you want prime, make sure it says USDA prime. Other names for this cut are a standing rib roast. That's regardless of what quality of beef it is. Or it's also sometimes called a ribeye roast because it is the roast that the ribeye steaks are cut from. If you like ribeye steaks and you like prime rib, there's probably a good reason for that. This cut has plenty of marbling, and so it ends up tender and juicy with that fat kind of melting all inside. That's what I love about this. If you are somebody who prefers really lean beef like filet mignon instead of ribeye, then you're going to want the roast that the filet mignon is cut from, the beef tenderloin. You see where I'm going with that? So I will link to my beef tenderloin recipe for you in case you want to head in that direction. Now, the full prime rib roast is 7 ribs. It is huge. If you are cooking that, you are lucky. It is glorious and so fun to cook. But if you're doing fewer ribs, then you sometimes can choose between the small end and the large end. The small end comes from closer to the loin, and it's going to be more tender and less fatty. That's where you beef tenderloin filet mignon people might want to head if you still want to do prime rib. The large end is closer to the chuck, and it's less tender with more marbling. So those of you who like your ribeyes, you might want to be over there. Now, these prime ribs or standing rib roasts are sold boneless, bone-in, or kind of like a hybrid in between. If you've got a boneless roast, you don't have to do anything before you start the dry brining process. If you have a bone-in roast, there's possibly 2 different things that you could have. One is just a straight up bone in attached to the whole roast, or you have a bone in roast where the butcher has like carved the bones off of the roast and then tied them back on. That's called a chef's style roast. So the thing is, the bone is really great in there because it kind of helps with the heat conduction and also acts like a little built-in rack, and it just looks really good. And those ribs are delicious when they're roasted. I'm telling you, it is the first thing I reach for. If there's a platter of prime rib slices and a couple of those bones, I'm going for the bone. But the issue is, well, 2 issues really. If the bone's on there, then you can't actually season the meat that's between the bone and like the rest of the roast. That's one issue. Also, with that bone on there, it's actually kind of hard to carve it when it comes time to make your slices because the bones are kind of in the middle of where you want your slices to be. I therefore recommend that you either trim off those bones, making your own chef-style roast. And if you have one already, I actually recommend that you untie them. And what we're going to do is actually season in there. So you cut your bones off or you untie the bones from the roast, and then you season where the bones were. And we're actually going to put rosemary sprigs and garlic in there, and then you tie it back together. Now you've got the seasoning in there, and you've got the benefit of those bones, and it's going to be easier to carve. See, win, 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 win all over. Okay, so the instructions I'm giving are for a 10-pound bone-in roast that you've done in this chef-style way, or a boneless roast. If you have a smaller roast, everything is going to be the same in terms of how you figure out the cooking time. It's just the seasoning you're going to do a little bit less if you have a smaller one, okay? And if you have a bigger one, well, then you're going to calculate the time differently and you're going to use more seasoning. So you'll start by trimming off as much of the excess fat from the roast as you'd like. I like to leave quite a bit on there, like a good 1/4 inch because it's so yummy. And then for the bone-in roast, you're going to cut, just keeping your knife as close to those bones as possible between the bones and the rest of the roast until you have that slab of bones on the side. Whether your roast is boneless or a bone-in one that you've just done this to, you're seasoning everything all over with 3 tablespoons of kosher salt and with 2 tablespoons of coarse black pepper. Then, if you are going to be doing this with a boneless roast, get out a rack on a pan and you're going to put 8 sprigs of fresh rosemary on there, and you're going to top it with 4 cloves of minced garlic, and then you're going to put your boneless roast fat side up on top of that garlic and rosemary. So it's going to get flavored underneath there. And that's also going to flavor the au jus later as well. If you have that bone-in roast that you've done chef style to, you are seasoning it all over, like I said, with 3 tablespoons of salt and 2 tablespoons of black pepper. Season the bones and the roast. And then onto the side of the roast that you cut the ribs off of, you're going to pat the garlic onto there, 4 cloves, and then you're going to lay your 8 sprigs of rosemary on there, and then you're going to put the bones back on, and then you're going to tie them kind of like you tie a present. Put the butcher's twine underneath, bring it up over top, tie. So now you're tying like where the bones are because they're on the top there, and then go with another piece of twine in the other direction, perpendicular, and bring that up and tie it up there as well. Looks like a little present. And then that is going on a rack, in a pan, also into the fridge. So either kind of roast is going into the fridge for at least 4 hours, but as long as 48 hours. I really think the sweet spot is somewhere between 24 and 48, like 36 hours is what I usually do. Take that roast out of the oven an hour before you're going to start cooking it. That just lets it kind of come up to room temperature a bit. It's going to cook more evenly and a little bit more quickly. And then you're going to preheat the oven to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. That is low. We're cooking this low and slow, but I'm going to tell you, so many people's ovens are not accurate. And if yours is off in a down kind of way by more than like 10 degrees, it's going to be a problem here. Like if you want your oven at 275 and it's actually at like 260, 265, your roast is not going to cook quickly enough. So I really recommend that you use an oven thermometer. They're very inexpensive. I can link to one that you can buy on Amazon, probably get it next day delivery. Amazon is crazy, but my grocery store sells them as well. So next time you're at the grocery store, just go and look. They probably have them. They're like $6 to $8. If you're worried about this and you don't have an oven thermometer, just set your oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit and you will for sure be fine, unless your oven's off by more than 25 degrees. I really hope it's not. Okay, then you're going to pour 2 cups of red wine into your roasting pan. Now I know a lot of people worry that having the liquid under the pan is going to make the roast steam instead of brown. But don't forget, we're doing the reverse sear on this one, which is going to add a nice crust at the end. So it's okay if there's a little bit of dampness going on down there. That red wine is actually going to be catching the juices that come off of your beef roast. They're going to be concentrating and mixing together down there. The red wine's going to concentrate and get yummy. You're going to add more unsalted beef broth, actually not wine. You're going to add unsalted beef stock to that as you go. I'm saying unsalted because it's going to concentrate the salt as it evaporates and it'll make it too salty. And that's also why I'm advising stock instead of broth, because unsalted beef stock tends to have less sodium than unsalted beef broth does. So you're just going to add a little bit more of that as the roast is cooking. If you notice that the level's getting down below 1/4 inch, add some of that stock and then kind of swish it around in the pan. And that's going to help dissolve any of the wine that's caramelized around the sides. You want all that concentrating down in your juices at the bottom. Okay, so you put the wine in the roasting pan. If you don't want to use wine, you can use 2 cups of unsalted beef stock mixed with a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, and that'll work lovely. So you pour that into the bottom of the roasting pan, and then you're putting your roast right on there, the rib side or bone side down, fat side up. If you're using a boneless roast, then you would do a rack, an oven-safe rack in there, just so that it's not the meat sitting right down in the juices, but elevated up. But the bones do that on its own. That's kind of what they're beautiful for. One last thing before that goes into the oven, I highly recommend that you use a probe thermometer that gives you a continuous reading of the temperature for this one. Like I said at the beginning, this is an expensive cut of meat and you don't want to risk anything here. You want to take it out at the exact right time. I'm going to talk about what temperature that is in a second, but for now, you're putting that probe thermometer all the way into the very middle center, not touching bone, but the bone isn't in the center, so that won't be a problem here. And then you're going to get a good reading. Mine has like a wire that comes out of the oven and then a little digital reader that magnetizes to the oven so that I can monitor the temperature. Oh, I forgot to say, if you're doing the boneless one, you can leave some of that rosemary and garlic right under the roast. That's fine. And it'll like flavor your au jus as the beef drippings drip down under it. If you're not using the rack, you can actually put the rosemary and garlic under the roast straight in the pan with the red wine. That is fine as well. Not ideal, but it is fine. Now we reach the time for controversy. I'm telling you, I haven't posted this recipe on TikTok or Instagram yet, but I know everybody's going to get mad at me. The thing is, when it comes to prime rib, the ideal temperature is at least medium. I know a lot of people like their rare and medium rare roast beef, rare, medium rare steaks, but here we have all that fat and marbling in the middle. We want it to get warm. We want it to melt into the meat. That's the whole point. If your steak or your roast is rare or medium rare, it's not having a chance to really melt all that in there. So it is best to cook it to medium. What I will say is that if you are a rare, medium rare household, then you might want to do medium rare in the middle, and then the ends will be more of that medium. You know what I mean? Because if you are a medium rare household and the very middle is medium, the ends are going to be more like medium well, and you really won't be happy with those. So that is kind of your wiggle room in there. But really, you want this a little bit more well done than you would, say, that beef tenderloin, okay? Now, depending on the size of your roast, the shape of your roast, small, large, there's all kinds of factors involved here. I can't get super specific with you about how long this is going to take. It depends on too many things. It's going to probably be between 30 to 40 minutes per pound, but keep your eye on it before that. Like after 3 hours, start looking. You don't want to overcook this one. So just keep your eye on it. Now, if you're worried about how do you know when to cook the rest of your meal, don't forget that this roast is going to be resting for a long time. You'll have enough time actually to make mashed potatoes, to make the au jus, to make your side dishes. If you're working quickly and have a lot of things prepped, you're going to have time while the roast rests. So let the roast and its doneness determine when you do everything else and what time you eat. Don't be too wedded to having everything ready at the exact time. Have lots of appetizers out for people to snack on. Everything's going to be okay. So if you are ignoring my advice and you are cooking this to just be rare, you're taking it out between 120 and 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, we're taking it out before it's done because it's going to rest for a long time. That's going to raise the temperature up, and then it is going into that really hot oven later. It's unlikely to permeate and really change the temperature at that point, but just keep that in mind. So for rare, 120 to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Medium rare, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Medium, that's the recommended one, 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Medium well is between 145 to 150 Fahrenheit, and well is between 155 to 160. So you're taking that out of the oven then and transfer it to a plate or another pan, tent it loosely with foil, and leave it there for 30 to 45 minutes. If it's a really big roast, you can even go as long as an hour. While that's resting, you are making your side dishes, and you're going to make this delicious au jus. So don't forget, you poured that red wine into the roasting pan before you started, and then every now and then you might have topped it up with some unsalted beef stock. Now we're going to turn that into something delicious. So pour all the drippings from the roasting pan into a fat separator or a narrow container, and then pour another new half cup of beef stock into the roasting pan and swish it all around, scrape up the bottom. Use a rubber spatula to really get the bottom and sides, get anything brown off of there, and then pour that into your liquid that you put in the fat separator or the narrow container. Now, if it's a fat separator, the fat rises to the top, and then you pour the liquid out from the bottom. If you have the narrow container instead, you can spoon the fat off the top. We're not using the fat for anything here. We're not making gravy. I will link to my beef gravy recipe for you in case you want to do that instead of the au jus. You can totally do that right from this point in this recipe, no problem. But I'm going to keep telling you about the au jus. Okay, now you're going to pour your liquid into a measuring cup. You want 4 cups of liquid to serve 12 people. We're doing like a third of a cup of au jus per person. If you want more than a third of a cup, adjust as necessary, okay? So you measure how much liquid you have, and then you make up the difference with more unsalted beef stock. So for 12 people with 1/3 of a cup per person, we want 4 cups of liquid. So you add until you have that much. Pour the 4 cups into a saucepan and heat it over medium-high heat until it's boiling. Reduce it to low, and then you're stirring in a teaspoon of prepared horseradish. You're not going to taste that it tastes like horseradish. It just makes it go so well with the beef. It's just like, oh my God, this is the best au jus ever. Like that kind of deal. You know what I mean? After you add the horseradish, simmer it on low for 10 minutes and then turn off the heat. You'll notice we did not add salt at this point, and that's because, as you know, as it's sitting back there simmering, it's hot, it's evaporating, that's going to concentrate the salt. So if you add it now and salt it to taste, it could end up too salty later. We're going to heat it up just before serving and then taste and add salt right at the end, okay? Just trust me on this. I've had salty gravy, salty au jus too many times in my life. I've learned you don't have to learn from experience. You can learn from me. Okay, once your roast is done resting, you're going to preheat the oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, really high. Now, you can put it back into the roasting pan it was in. Just wipe it out well, because if there's anything left in there, it's going to burn, right? Or you can use a different pan. Either way. And then you are putting it in the roasting pan, fat side up. You can put the bones in there too, like off to the side beside it, and cook until well browned on top, nice and crispy. 10 to 12 minutes. Right before it's finished browning, you can heat that au jus back up, taste it, and season it with salt as we discussed. And then when the roast is finished browning, you take it out and you carve it immediately. It already rested. We already let those juices all like stop simmering inside, calm down, get reabsorbed, and it hasn't been in there for long enough to actually really like disturb that again. So we can carve right away, which is how we manage to keep that nice, dark, crispy crust, right? Okay, if it's a boneless roast, you are just simply slicing it. People usually do prime rib thicker than other roast beefs, so you're going to do 1/4 to 1/3 inch slices. For the bone-in roast, cut the string, remove that slab of bones, discard the rosemary and garlic. Then cut between the bones and put those on your serving platter, or just start eating one on your own while you're doing the rest of the carving. It's the best thing about being the cook. You get all the treats. And then you slice the remaining big chunk of roast the same way you would a boneless roast into those 1/4 or 1/3 inch slices. Arrange those on your serving platter next to however many bones are actually left there, and serve that roast with your warm horseradish red wine au jus, and maybe some more horseradish on the side as well. Oh, I'll link to my horseradish sauce recipe. It is so good. You're going to love that. It is amazing with prime rib. Okay, I think that might be the longest episode I've ever recorded of this podcast. I hope you learned a lot and that you are ready to make the best prime rib of your life. If you enjoyed this episode and you are not already a subscriber to the podcast, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now. It's free. There are over 1,200 episodes. Just go to your favorite podcast app and search for Recipe of the Day. You will find me there. Or go to cookthestory.com/ROTD and you will see places to subscribe up there, like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, that kind of thing. That is also where you can get the link to this recipe. If you are listening somewhere and you're like, how do I get the actual recipe? Go to cookthestory.com/ROTD. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is December 22nd of 2024. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.